Welcome in to the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast, the official podcast of your New Orleans Pelicans. A podcast dedicated to everything you need to know about the squad. Hear from players, coaches, broadcasters, and those who cover the NBA on a daily basis. It's time to flock up. The New Orleans Pelicans Podcast starts right now.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast, the official podcast of your New Orleans Pelicans. Coming up next segment, Mr. Will Guillory of The Athletic covers the Heat, the Pelicans, the NBA, does it all, and more importantly, he will be here to promote North Carolina basketball. Jim Eichenhofer from Pelicans.com. Is that part of the deal?
I think so. He also is covering the Grizzlies as well. So, man, this guy's got
everything.
We've talked about business cards before. Man, this guy's got 18 logos. There's a college logo on there.
He does.
But, yeah, he's very knowledgeable about college basketball. He's been watching a lot of the guys. As he mentions, too, he's directed a lot of his attention in that way because of the fact that the Pelicans are headed towards a lottery pick. So, makes sense that he would spend a little bit more time than usual trying to assess and evaluate some of these college players.
Pelicans starting a little bit of a road trip here as they'll take on the Timberwolves, Jim, on Wednesday and on Friday. So today and Friday. And then Sunday, they will take on the Pistons, a team that they played on Monday, which I guess we can get into and see how that went. On Sunday at 2 p.m., then right back with the back-to-back here on Monday. So very busy slate of games here, Jim. But overall, that game on Monday was, look, obviously the thing that everyone talks about is what took place with Trey Murphy. And it's tough. It's 50 seconds in. It happened so fast, and it happened in a way that defies logic, to be honest with you. I mean, shot blocked, trying to brace himself from falling. Somehow his arm gets tangled with a Pistons player's right leg. Pop goes the shoulder. Torn goes the labrum. Partially torn goes the rotator cuff. Season injured. Here it is.
As Murphy had it poked, ball on the deck. It's in the front court now, and it's run down by Asar Thompson, and Trey Murphy is hurt.
Yes, he is.
He is hurt, and it's a hand or a finger. It's 5-on-4 right now.
Commit the foul.
And we will, and this is a disastrous beginning to this game because he is in pain.
He was in a scramble for the basketball. He didn't come up with it, obviously, and he must have jammed a hand or whatever it is. I say jam. That looks like it's worse than that.
Aaron, can you see?
It looks like he popped his shoulder out,
man.
his right one, which is why he just couldn't move his arm and was in a lot of pain.
And obviously, after the game, head coach Willie Green didn't have much to say other than what took place on the court and how it affected the team.
I think just to start the game with the Trey going down, it kind of just rocked us from there. We didn't have a rhythm offensively, kind of felt sorry for ourselves a bit. We can't do that, but it really it shook our guys up, especially with all we've kind of been through this season.
So, Jim, by 11 o'clock that night, though, the team officially saying that his season was done. It was a torn labrum, partial tear to the rotator cuff, and the season of seasons just continues here. It just stinks, man. It stinks for him.
Yeah, I cursed this season from the highest mountaintop. I can't believe some of the stuff that's happened. I mean, it was one of those plays, too, if you listen to the way that the radio guys described it, it was one of those things where it's like he got hurt in multiple ways. It did seem like maybe it was his hand or his finger, but you also knew that his shoulder was hurt as well. So, yeah, it was just terrible. It was what a horrible way to start the game. And, I mean, Aaron must have had a good angle. I didn't have a good angle to tell what happened. Even after I saw the replay, I wasn't totally sure. But, I mean, unfortunately that was correct, that it was his shoulder. He's going to be out for the rest of the season. I mean, the guy made a really good jump this year. He had stretches that we'd never seen before. I mean, he's done some really good stuff in his previous 3 seasons. So for him to improve the way that he did and play as well as he did and kind of, I think, ascend to another level as a player in the NBA was really positive. It's just unfortunate now that, the next however long he's going to be having to rehabilitate before he can get back on the court.
I don't know if he answered fully, but to me he did, right? Is he a starter in the NBA? I think he is.
100%.
And then the other thing to me that I take away out of this, and again, we're going to do this in our player breakdowns at the end of the season, but we've literally had a topic in the round table here with JD and Graf and you. And I asked, is he an all-star player? And all y'all answered yes. So beginning of the season, we're excited to see the jump. At the end of the season, guy's a starter, possible all-star player in the future.
Yeah, I don't
think...
think...
So that's a pretty good...
Yeah.
And he didn't have a full season.
Sure. Honestly, I don't think he's an all-star yet.
Right.
But I think he's on the way. And so the progress that he made and the steps that he put forth this year make you think that it's possible that he could be in the future at some point. Maybe before the season, there's people that were... I mean, I don't want to pat myself on the back too much here, but I've always been a huge proponent of him. I think I've even said on the podcast going back before the season that I thought he had all-star potential. So It was great to see him fulfill some of that. But I think there's a lot of people that thought, maybe me or whoever said that they think he could be an all-star. We're like, no, he's not going to be an all-star.
Yeah.
But I think the fact that what he did this season showed that wasn't a completely ridiculous, outlandish take to have.
No doubt. Well, look, obviously the season is what it is, and you just have so many games left now, and it's looking towards the future, whether it's the draft, and we're going to talk about that with Will Guillory, specifically how to look at March Madness for you folks. And I'm not talking about just brackets, Jim. It's, certain players that a lot of people have predicted they're going to go in the top 10, top 5, where the Pels have potential to pick. So we'll get to that next. But Executive Vice President of Basketball Operations David Griffin spoke pregame on the television broadcast, Jim, specifically about the future, specifically about the player also in the last several weeks that has set career highs, triple doubles, career highs in assists. And I'm talking about, of course, Zion Williamson. Here's what he had to say.
Let's start with Zion, who has been playing, I think by all accounts, some of the best basketball, if not the best basketball of his young career so far. What have you seen from Ziggy?
Well, I think the same thing you guys have, and I know you talk about this often. His growth, both in terms of his maturity as a human being, as a leader, has really matched his growth on the court. He's putting forth incredible effort. He's doing things he's never done before from a work rate standpoint. And what happens, and you know this better than anybody, when you start to see the fruits of your labor, it becomes a little bit more addictive. And I think he's bought in more and more as his success has grown in terms of his efficiency. Now, obviously, the only thing he cares about is winning games, and we're not doing that. And honestly, that's the carrot you use to get more of that. But he is capable now of things he's never been able to do on a basketball court. He's also the lightest he's ever been. He's in the best shape of his life. I think Daniel Bove has done an amazing job on our performance team of getting him to buy into all of those things. It's been fun to watch.
I think one of the things that was interesting, just listening to Griff, I'm sure we're going to revisit some of these clips too, maybe when we do the season reviews after the year's over. But it was good to hear Griff's perspective on some of these players, and obviously Zion's been one of the most positive parts of this. We talked about Trey Murphy earlier, the jump that he's made, but I think Zion's also done the same thing as far as just his consistency from game in and game out, and for him to be as efficient and productive as he has. Even though he hasn't been playing, 35, 40 minutes, he's still been putting up numbers that you are comparable to guys that do play more minutes than that.
Yeah, I'm going back to one of those games here at home recently where, he was one of those nights that was struggling. And in the second half, he was just I think it was in the podcast, I described it as, bleep this, we're going to win. And he kind of took it on himself. And look, I hate saying that phrase, but it is what it is, right? There's nothing to really play for. It's kind of one of those things, well, we didn't have it tonight. But he led the way to the team finding a way to win in a season where there isn't, a postseason spot to play for. And I think that is a good thing. And I want to say, after one of those games too, you heard C.J. McCollum say the motor's different. The approach is different. The studying as to what he's going to see is different. And that's that next step and that next level. Of course, you need some other guys that help you here as well. And the veterans that came in the Brandon Ingram trade, and Bruce Brown and Kelly Olynyk, both guys you've talked about specifically about how they help this team. Bruce Brown playing well as of late, especially getting into that starting lineup. Kelly Olynyk, man, is a guy that has been playing really well. Here's what David Griffin had to say about them.
How would you like Bruce and Kelly to complement both of those players?
Well, I wish like crazy it wouldn't have taken us so long to get that situation rectified. Obviously, Brandon's a player we cared a great deal about as a human being and still do remain close to them. But knowing that we needed to build for the future there, Kelly is a player that spoke to us a great deal, and we've talked about this a lot. But I think what you've seen since he's been here is his basketball IQ is at another level, probably the best on our team, honestly. And I think what he's done is he's brought out the best in some of our other players who now have the benefit of an extremely high IQ, floor spacing big. The play where he's ducking in really hard off of the initial action, that's something that's creating pathways we didn't have, and that came entirely from him and his intellect. And Bruce is very, very similar, just not a big, obviously.
Yeah, there's been some extenuating circumstances lately with players that have been out for different games and the rotation changed a little bit. But I would say in general, Monday's game notwithstanding, that the Pelicans have been a lot more competitive since Kelly Olynyk started playing for them, right after the All-Star break. So I think you can see some of the impact that he's made in a lot of these games recently.
And then also, of course, you have young players being developed. Jim, in a season like this, you get guys that get more minutes on the court, obviously because of injuries and just trying to figure things out. So here's what David Griffin had to say about some of the younger players.
Let's talk about the growth of some of our young guys so far this year. We've obviously seen a lot from EBC and what he has been able to do, but also from Carlo Magovich, who has played very well since the All-Star break, and then somebody like Brandon Boston, who I know he's been injured. We haven't seen him as of late, but those three guys, very interesting prospects for us right now.
Yeah, I think that what you've seen, again, the injury situation comes into this pretty mightily. Eve played far more early than he probably would have, and the benefits of that are that we've got an all-rookie team member, probably an all-rookie first-team member, and a guy who's established himself as a big part of what we're going to do moving forward. Carlo Makovich was somebody that, from a scouting perspective, we were very, very high on coming in. It took a little while, and you saw him, obviously, in camp. His talent level is incredible for a big, whether a rookie or not. And what Carlo has done is really bring all of that to the fore because they've needed him to. And again, the injuries provided that platform. But you're talking about a kid who can dribble, pass, and shoot. He can rim protect. He can defend. And he's just scratching the surface of who he's going to be as a player.
And then Brandon Boston, I know what did you see from him? And he was a guy who joined us late because he was in San Antonio. Spurs waive him. We pick him up. He goes from a two-way to a standard contract. I know he's hurt right now. He's dealing with the ankle sprain that turned into a small fracture. We'll get an update on him probably in about a week or so. But what did you see in him earlier this year?
Yeah, so I think the thing with Brandon, and it'd be disingenuous of us to take credit for this because we didn't know. When we claimed him, what we intended him to be was a high-volume scorer on our G League team. And when we brought him to us, we wanted him to have the ability to learn how to be not ball dominant, how to play off the ball, how to be a 3-and-D player. What ended up happening because of all the injuries, once again, he got to have the ball and do what he does best in the NBA, which made him comfortable. But as an offshoot of that, what we learned is he's a special on-ball defender. And his ability to guard multiple positions from an on-ball perspective is something that I don't think anyone had a right to expect, but it's certainly been really, really a bright spot for us.
I like what Griff said about Carlo, where he talked about kind of his array of skills, the package of things that he can do. We've seen him a couple times lately kind of take the ball end-to-end, dribble 94 feet, and dunk on somebody, which is something that I don't know necessarily we aware of. I mean, I think, I go back to even Summer League. He had one game in Summer League where he had, I can't remember exactly what the stats were. It doesn't matter that much. It was like 28 points and 14 rebounds, and he didn't even play, 35 minutes or whatever. And it wasn't just, people say like, Summer League, whatever, Jim. But it's like, to me, it wasn't the stats. It was the way that he did it. It was how many different ways he scored, where he shot a couple face-up three-pointers. He posted people up. He had good footwork. He had some hook shots. It was like, you see he made a couple mid-range shots, if I remember correctly. Mm-hmm. It was like all these different things that he can do in a game that he can implement. And I feel like we're starting to see that in NBA games now, too, where you're seeing that he's not – a lot of backup big guys are – raw offensively, a little bit limited. They don't necessarily have that high of a ceiling because, it's just the nature of the way it is that, some of these guys are really athletic and really big, but they don't have a huge skill set. So But I don't think Carlo is that way. I mean, he has really good hands. He can shoot. And so that was something that I enjoyed from what Griff said about the players, is the fact that, and I think Carlos is one of those guys that I think is a player that we're going to keep a close eye on over the last 13 games. I would think that he'll continue to get more and more of an opportunity, just like Yves Missi, which was another player that Griff referenced there.
No doubt. Well, let's see what Will Guillory has to say about where maybe the next young player could be coming from. Jim and he discuss a lot of some of the young players we'll be maybe watching in March Madness. We'll get to that here in a quick sec. And then also, don't forget, it's Wednesday, which means it's Western Conference Wednesday. But up first, Mr. Will Guillory, The Athletic. All right, time now to bring in a very special guest, Mr. Will Guillory, who, I can't see you because you're on the phone right now, but I'm going to say, Jim, that he has a grin from ear to ear, because when we last saw him, he didn't even say hi. He didn't ask how I was doing. He goes, what do you think about North Carolina, and should they be in? And I knew what that answer had to be. I had to say they absolutely deserved it, and Will Guillory, they showed it last night.
There was only one correct answer to that question. We all knew there were a lot of haters, but then we proved them wrong last night. I think the final margin was, 30, 40, 50? I don't even know. But it was a resounding victory for all the people who knew the correct answer.
I just knew you'd have something to say for the haters today, Will. I just knew it.
Listen, they were very loud on Selection Sunday and very quiet last night. It was mighty quiet on the timeline.
That's for sure. Well, Will, one of the reasons that we wanted to have you on, I've talked to you throughout the season about the college players coming out in the draft, and I have to admit, you probably at least 10 times more knowledgeable about the college draft and some of the players coming out, because I think just from talking to you, I know that you've been watching. I definitely can't say that I've been watching a whole lot of college basketball, but I know that you are you've been following a lot of these prospects. And I guess first of all, I'll start with there's a lot of talk last season about last offseason that the 2024 draft was pretty weak, and it seems like based on the way the NBA season has unfolded, that's been pretty accurate. I don't think there's been a lot of people who've said, that they were wrong about last year's draft. But how do you see this year's draft? Do you feel like it seems like if you went back a ways, maybe to even a year or two ago, this draft has been very hyped as far as there's a lot of promising players, there's a lot of talent at the top of the draft. Do you still feel the same way that you did maybe a year or so ago that you do now as far as how excited you are about this draft?
Yeah, I was going to say that's a big part of why I've been so all in on watching a lot of these guys. It's because of the hype coming into this season about, obviously it all starts with Cooper Flagg, a generational, prospect at the top. That's kind of where it all starts with these draft classes. How many superstars do they have at the top? And it kind of begins with Cooper Flagg. But then, you heard names like Dylan Harper, Ace Bailey, these other guys who had a lot of potential as well. And, I really wanted to key in on these guys. And, obviously as the Pelican season has gone the way it's gone, I'll spend a whole lot more time watching these guys because, there's high potential that one of these guys are going to be in New Orleans next year. So for me, I'm obviously I think Cooper Flagg has lived up to, all of the hype. He's been incredible this year. Duke has been outstanding. You got me saying nice things about Duke early in the morning, and I really don't like it. But yeah, Cooper Flagg has been great. Dylan, even though Rutgers, was really bad this year, they didn't make the NCAA tournament. I think Dylan Harper and Ace Bailey were, just as good as people thought they would be. And a lot of these other guys I didn't know this time last year who we're going to talk about were, had really good seasons. So I think in particular, this freshman class coming in, it's not just, some of the upperclassmen. There's a bunch of 18, 19-year-old guys that are going to be coming out in this draft who are really, really talented.
So, look, I think we kind of talked about it when I saw you on Monday after you Spanish Inquisition me about North Carolina. One of the things that I wanted to talk about was so interesting because I'm with you, right? I'm paying attention a little bit more to the tournament because of the potential that the Pels could get somebody on the top. How strange is it, and you brought it up, that Harper and Bailey, and I literally last night looked at a bunch of mock drafts, and I'm texting back and forth with Aaron Summers about it, that they didn't make the tournament. Why did Rutgers not make the tournament when potentially two of their starting five could be two of the top five taken in the draft? Is that odd?
It is very odd, and I think it all kind of starts with, the oddity of them just going to Rutgers in the first place, right? Rutgers isn't known as a powerhouse basketball program. I couldn't even tell you the last time I remember seeing Rutgers in the NCAA tournament. And I think, part of it is that, Dylan Harper's older brother, Ron Harper Jr., went to Rutgers when he played in college. But, I mean, still, I think it was kind of a strange decision for those guys to go there. And once they did end up there, you kind of saw that program wasn't quite ready, for that level of basketball. And I think, a lot of people look at their record and say, man, I guess Dylan Harper and Cooper and Ace Bailey really aren't as good as people thought. And I say, no, if you watch the games, those guys were crazy good. They had some incredible games, both of them. But I just think they just didn't have enough talent around them to really compete, especially when you talk about the Big Ten Conference, where there are a lot of good teams out there. They played a really good, pre-conference schedule as well. So, yeah, I think they just kind of didn't realize what they were getting into going into that Rutgers program. And, ultimately their goal was to go to the NBA and be a top 5 pick. So I guess mission accomplished on that front.
Sure. It's funny. Might be a random thought, but it kind of reminds me a little bit of when Ben Simmons went to LSU. It's one of those things where it's unfortunate because you get a player that's that hyped and you think, okay, at least for the one season that he's here, you're going to have an amazing year. You're going to make a deep run in the NCAA tournament. You're going to, win a ton of games. It didn't happen, but I mean, like you said, there's so many other factors behind, a team's success. From the Pelicans standpoint, obviously right now they have the 4th worst record in the NBA. So as it stands right now, most likely they would if the season ended today, they would most likely end up in the top 5 or 6. So what I wanted to do with you, just for people like myself who haven't been closely monitoring college basketball and don't know a ton about some of these top guys other than maybe a highlight here or there, is just kind of go through. I wanted to just go through the top 5 or 6 of NBA.com's mock draft that they have right now that is posted. They have, I've done this in previous years with scouts from teams or from other teams around the NBA. Obviously, they were always anonymous, where they kind of go through the player comps. People always know that, going into the draft analysts always say, like, this guy reminds me of this player and this guy from either the current NBA or the past. So just wanted to start with you because you've watched a lot of these guys. Cooper Flagg is, number 1 on NBA.com's mock draft. The pro comparisons they have listed for him are Franz Wagner and Jalen Johnson. Which of those two guys is most accurate, or do you like either of those comps based on what you've seen?
I'm not mad at those two comps. I think it's pretty interesting when we talk about like a generational prospect and we're comparing them to like Jalen Johnson. You would think like, hey, he's more like LeBron. Is he Kevin Durant? Is he Steph Curry? And I would say about Cooper Flagg, he's not going to come in and immediately be a guy who like, man, this guy looks like he can average 30 a game in the NBA, or he looks like he can just carry our offense every single time like a Luka Doncic. But I think what impresses me so much about Cooper Flagg already at 19 years old is that I feel like he's going to come in as almost already as a complete package, as a full player, as a guy with great size on the wing. He can shoot the 3 ball, obviously can make plays in transition, a really good athlete, defends at a high level, plays hard every single night, a really good passer, which surprised me. He's averaging around 4 assists a game at Duke when, he's sharing the ball with multiple ball handlers out there. He's still making plays. He can play on the ball. He can play off the ball. I just think he's going to step in and be able to just contribute no matter where he goes, and they don't have to change a whole lot to fit him in. I think he's just a guy who can really fit in wherever he goes and contribute at a high level. I think the big question for him coming in is what that jump shot is going to look like. How high will that 3-point percentage go? How much of a threat he'll be in that area? But he's been knocking those down at a pretty good rate when he's at Duke. So I think he's just been extremely impressive in his first year at Duke. And I just think the intensity he plays with every night is, I think, what I, really enjoy the most watching Cooper Flagg is that dude shows up every night and plays extremely hard, and he lifts up his teammates with his intensity, and I think whatever fan base gets him is going to love that about him.
One of the things that you said about, you mentioned the Jalen Johnson comparison. One of the things I try to do, I guess as time has gone on, I've kind of learned this or tried to figure this out. I try to take the player comps more as like style of play than them projecting, okay, he's going to be as good as Jalen Johnson. Because, I think sometimes the comps you go either way. Sometimes you look at them and you're like, man, if this is the number 1 pick and this is what he ends up going to be, it's going to be really disappointing. But on the other side, sometimes you see player projections where you're like, there's no way that the 34th pick of the draft is going to be as good as this guy that they're comparing him to. So
exactly.
Yeah, so I try to narrow it more to, because for myself, if I haven't watched these guys, I don't have a good feel of even what type of player the guy is. So that's where I like the player comps. That helps me a little bit, at least before I start to watch a lot more video, when we get into like April and May after the season's over. Number two,
and I think a lot of time the player comps kind of take away from people appreciating your game, right? Because I think about Trae Young coming into the NBA. Everybody saw him shooting the deep 3-pointers and immediately made the Steph Curry comps, right? And everybody kind of saw him and said, yeah, this guy's good, but he's not Steph. And I think that kind of stuck with him for a while.
Right.
And if you just watch Trae Young's game, he's a really good player, but he's just not Steph Curry, and that's fine. There's only one Steph Curry in the history of the NBA.
For sure.
So, yeah, I think you're exactly right.
Number 2 on the list, Dylan Harper. The comparisons they have are Kobe White, De'Aaron Fox, and Jalen Brunson. What do you think?
I think I would probably, out of those three, lean a little bit more Jalen Brunson. I don't think he's quite the explosive athlete you would see with a De'Aaron Fox, and I probably think he's going to be a better just floor general, pure point guard than Kobe White. What I like to say is he's like a big Jalen Brunson and a left hand Cade Cunningham. What I like to say about Dylan Harper.
Okay.
I think he's gonna be a big guy who can control your offense. He's got great vision at the point guard position, can score it, can hit threes, get to the basket. He knows how to use his body really well. Like I said, he's not like a really explosive athlete, but he still moves really well on the court, can get downhill, and he's one of my favorite guys in this draft just because he can do so many things, and he's a real leader on the court, which you really want out of your point guard position. And I think, a lot of people are going to say that Cooper Flagg is the ultimate prize in this draft, but if we're talking about from a Pelicans perspective, I think considering the DeJounte Murray situation, him having a torn Achilles, and, potentially being out for a good chunk of next year, I think landing Dylan Harper would be a huge win for the Pelicans, just to have an answer as what your point guard of the future is going to be, and as a guy who can really fit well with the Trey Murphy, with the Zion Williamson. I love Dylan Harper's game, and I think he's going to be really, really good.
Definitely going to get into that part of it with you a little bit more in terms of the Pelicans specifically, at how they approach this top part of the draft in a second. But number 3 on the list is Ace Bailey. The comparisons they have for him are Brandon Miller, Michael Porter Jr., and Rashard Lewis. What do you got for that one?
Oh, the Rashard Lewis one is interesting. I haven't heard that one, but I do think I like the Michael Porter Jr. I've heard people kind of throw Paul George out there with Ace Bailey because when you watch him shoot the ball, he's got a gorgeous jump shot, and a dude who's a legit 6'9", 6'10". Like when you watch him, when you see him walk in the gym, that dude is big already as a freshman. And he's going to be much taller than a lot of the wings that he plays against in the league. And man, when you watch his highlights, you want to talk about a tough shot maker. That dude, he makes some instant. Now, a couple of the shots, it's like, hey, Ace, you didn't have to take that shot. Like I think it's kind of the weakness of his game and the biggest strength of his game that he's such a good tough shot maker. And I think there are times that he relies a little too much on making tough shots. But you can see, when you watch him play, you can very well see how he would fit in the NBA as a dude who can make, he can, hit those mid-range jumpers. He can hit those pull-up threes. I think his handle is a little bit questionable at this point in his career. But, he's still young. You get him with an NBA staff over a couple of years, and that'll improve over time. But I think the big question with him is just shot selection and, how much effort he's going to play with defensively on a night-to-night basis. But I think offensively, he's a very special talent. And I think he's a guy who's going to, drive a lot of coaches, up the wall just because you see what he can do when he's playing in the right way. And when he's not, it can be really frustrating.
Again, from the NBA.com list, number 4, they have VJ Edgecombe from Baylor. The comparisons listed are Andrew Wiggins, Victor Oladipo, and Iman Shumpert.
Yeah, well, I've been talking to people about VJ Edgecombe, and I always say, this is my guy. I love VJ Edgecombe's game. I think he is he is so fun to watch. I think his defensive presence is what jumps out to me. I think he is so active on defense, gets a bunch of steals. He's an incredible athlete. You see some of the wild chase down blocks he's able to get in transition. The putback dunks he's able to get. He'll race in from the three-point line and just jump over everybody and get a putback dunk. I think he's a guy who can step in and fit in immediately with whatever team he plays on. I think when you're talking about a number 4 pick, I think the question will be, will he be closer to like a Derrick Jones Jr. type of guy, or will he be more like a Victor Oladipo, right? A guy who can do all of that great role player stuff, but also make plays on the ball, get you some scoring, make plays in pick and roll. I think that's going to be the big question with VJ Edgecombe, how high his ceiling is. But I think the floor on him is really high because he's such a great athlete and he's such a good defender as well.
Lastly, in the top 5 for NBA.com's mock draft, they have Trey Johnson from Texas. He's a guard. The comparisons for him are going back a ways to Allen Houston and then Tyler Hero, a player that you've seen many times in person.
Yeah, I think Trey Johnson is a really polarizing guy because he's averages around 20 a game at Texas. That's another team that's kind of lacking in talent around him. They made a little bit of noise in the SEC tournament, but I think he's a guy similar to Ace Bailey, a really good, tough shot maker, shoots it at a higher level. I think he was around 39% on three-pointers this year. He's just a guy who can knock down three-pointers at a really high level. The question is going to be, how much he can do off the dribble, how much he can get to the rim. But he's the guy who's going to come in immediately and be able to knock down threes, knock down those pull-up jumpers, and just be really confident in what he's doing offensively. I really like his game. He's got good size at the two-guard position. But the thing, similar to Ace Bailey, is going to be how much can he improve as a ball handler to kind of, add some variety to his game.
The most important question of all, which of these top 5 that we just went through have the most similar game to Will Guillory's game?
Oh, that is an excellent question. I'm gonna go Trey Johnson. I'm not like a 6'10" guy. You might know this about me, Jim.
Nor am I.
I'm gonna say I'm Ace Bailey. So yeah, I'm gonna say I'm Trey Johnson. I love to get up a 3-ball. Anybody that knows me knows that. I'm not a fan of dribbling or passing or playing defense. So yeah, just let me shoot my 3 balls and I'll be happy. I think that's pretty much Trey Johnson.
Isn't it Charles Barkley who says only bad things can happen when you try to play defense? Nothing good can come from that. So
I say the same thing. I tell everybody the best way to stay healthy playing basketball is keep both feet on the ground. Anybody that's doing that's running and jumping, that's how you get hurt. Just keep both feet on the ground and you'll be good.
There you go. I said I was going to ask you about the Pelicans specifically. I wanted to get into that too briefly. Obviously, we don't know, and we're not going to know until May 12th of where exactly the Pelicans are going to pick. So that obviously is going to color a lot of the discussion and maybe even make it easy to answer this. But, I mean, when you go into this draft, you're picking in this spot, given the Pelicans' circumstances overall, where they are in terms of their roster. I mean, do you look at this as, obviously it seems like people know who's going to be picked number 1, but if you're the Pelicans, do you look at position here, or do you say we got to get the best talent available and we'll worry about the details later?
Yeah, I mean, if you get number 1, Cooper Flag is the choice, no question. Like I said, he's a complete package. He can fit anywhere. He's outstanding on both ends of the court. You get him, and then the other factor is he's going to step in and be box office immediately. I mean, this guy is going to be a really big star the moment he steps into the league. If you got a chance to get him, you get him, and you figure out how he fits with everybody else later. But like I said, I think Dylan Harper would be an excellent fit for what the Pelicans need, just at the point guard position as a guy who can fit next to what you're building long term. I think he would be a really great fit. Ace Bailey, I think, would be an interesting one in New Orleans. But I think pretty much any of these guys that we mentioned, top 4, top 5, I think would be a really good fit in New Orleans. Obviously, there's levels because, Cooper Flag is above everybody else. I would probably put Dylan Harper a tier right below Cooper Flag, and then I would go Ace Bailey and some of the rest of these guys. But like we've said already, I mean, this draft is really good at the top. You can go, with a bunch of names we haven't mentioned, like, Yaka Jonas in Illinois. You got Derek Queen from Maryland. I mean, there's so many good players, and there's Jeremiah Fears from Oklahoma is one I really like. There are a bunch of dudes in this draft who are really good, 1 through 10, and I think you're going to feel pretty good about whichever one of these guys you land.
Yeah, I was thinking about going further into the top 10 with you, but hopefully we don't have to worry too farther than the top 5 or 6. But, we've already taken up a bunch of your time. I guess I had, just a couple quick things about the Pelicans right now. Obviously the Monday was a bad night overall for the Pelicans. And then, first minute of the game, Trey Murphy gets injured. They announced afterwards that he's out for the season. I mean, how do you see obviously it's terrible news for Trey because he's going to miss the rest of the season. How do you see the impact that that's going to have on the rotation, or what we should expect for the final 13 games in terms of now you have another guy, scorer, who's not going to play, and what that means in terms of Willie Green's rotation and how he's going to approach the last few weeks of the season?
Yeah, I think the big thing, we kind of mentioned it with a guy like Ace Bailey, right? When you remove Trey Murphy from the lineup along with Herb Jones, I think you're going to be just a lot smaller on the perimeter, right? We're going to see a lot of C.J. McCollum, Jose Alvarado, Antonio Reeves, those type of guys. With Trey Murphy, I think he just adds so much size on the perimeter. Trey's obviously made a big jump as a ball handler this year, shot creator. I think more of that is going to fall on a C.J., on a Jose. I think the spacing around Zion is going to be tougher without Trey out there. So I think everything's going to be just a little bit tougher because Trey was able to contribute so much. And I think the big scary thing is kind of what I wrote about this morning is that, with these injuries, with DeJounte, with Herb undergoing surgery, with some uncertainty attached to Trey Murphy, I think the big question is going to be, how many of these guys are going to be healthy at the start of next season, right? Well, where is Herb going to be at the start of training camp? Where's Trey going to be at the start of training camp? We know DeJounte is probably going to miss the first few months next season. So how much of this season from hell is going to bleed into next season, I think is the big concern for the Pels. But for right now, I think it's about, just getting these young guys some minutes. I think that's the big thing. You are where you are. Just keep Zion healthy, get your young guys minutes, and just get to the offseason and figure out where you go from there.
When I hear you talking about that next season, I'm sitting here thinking, man, I need a nap.
Did you see what I just did? My head went straight down,
Yeah.
And then I went to the computer to the right of me and typed in torn labrum surgery recovery time. And I'm just going to read from the screen. Sling 4 to 6 weeks, full range of motion and strength, will return to sports activities, often taking 3 to 6 months. So let's count, Will, since you made me do it here. April, May, June, that's 3 months. July, August, September is 6 months. Training camp is October. So based on this, he should be good to go for training camp?
Yeah, let's hope so. Because I enjoy watching Trey Murphy play basketball.
Yeah.
I'm going to go out on a limb here and say I enjoy watching Trey Murphy play basketball. So I'm hoping he's healthy. He's good to go. We get to watch as much of this team healthy as possible because I know I'm tired of writing about how this lineup hasn't played together before, how this guy is going to be out this number of weeks. I've been doing a whole lot of that over the past couple of years, guys, and I'm getting tired of it.
When Gus said that he went to his computer to look up something for a second, I thought he was typing in like therapy sessions or something like that, trying to, because that's what I think I need when I hear that. But it is what it is.
I thought he was going to type in, is it possible for me to give my labrum to Trey Murphy? I think there's a few people in the organization that will happily give up their labrum for Trey Murphy to be out there.
Yeah, that's a good point, though. I mean, Jim, that Will brings up, though, it's you hope that some of these injuries do come back and doesn't affect your start because, as we heard Zion say, Will, part of the goal for this basketball team the last several weeks and to finish the season is to get momentum going, is to create your identity so that, as Zion said, now famously when he clapped his hands, you're off and running to start the season. It's hard to do if people keep getting injured. And again, I keep looking at that play on, the weekend. It doesn't make any sense. I don't know how that happened 50 seconds in, but it's just the season that it is, isn't it?
Yeah, man, and I think a whole big part of how this season became what it was is because so many injuries happened immediately as the season started. Right? Famously, Trey Murphy hurt his hamstring day 2 of training camp. DeJounte Murray broke his hand game 1 of the season. CJ and Herb go down. What was it? Game 4, game 5. So, man, the big part of this season was it felt like it was over immediately, and you just don't want to feel like that started next season as well.
And Zion didn't even start the season, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was ill for the first game.
Which was crazy.
Which is why we never saw DeJounte, B.I., and Zion play together for that reason.
That is unreal. Are we going to hold them down to this? A sheet of, not sheet of integrity, but I guess the podcast of integrity. Who do you have on your bracket winning the national championship?
Am I wrong to say North Carolina? Would that be going too far?
That'd be going a little far.
I'm going out on a limb. I'm calling Houston. I love that Houston squad. They're tough as hell. They play defense, and they got some vets over there. I think to win in today's college, you got to have some vets on your squad. So I like Houston.
I have Houston Duke in the Final Four. I have Auburn Duke in the Natty, and I'm not going to tell you who I have winning.
That's enough Duke mentions. He probably just hung up on us already, guys.
That's why I'm using it at the end there. Who do you got, Jim? Have you looked at it? Do you have
Not really,
a bracket
no.
yet?
I haven't looked at it.
Okay,
no.
there it is.
No, I'm definitely not going to fill one out.
No brackets?
No.
My kid does it based on the animals, right? The mascots. My wife does the jerseys. Yes. And Will, as you know, hosting the show for so many years, they always beat me. So I don't know what that tells you. Jim should just select based off of maybe regions.
Proximity to New York State, maybe. I could do it that way. Whatever's closest to where I'm from.
Yeah. My then 7-year-old smoked me last year in the March Madness bracket. Basically just based on, well, an eagle can, grab a worm and all this. I'm not even kidding you. So it worked.
Yeah, the one thing we know about college basketball is the more you know about college basketball, the worse your bracket's going to look.
That is
so
maybe I have a chance.
That's why we love March Madness.
I love it, man. Will, thank you for your time as always, sir.
Appreciate you guys.
Thanks, Will.
All right, our thanks to Will as always. And I mentioned earlier, it is Wednesday.
All right, y'all. Now it's time for Western Conference Wednesday. Mr. Eichenhofer will tell us whose stock is up and whose stock is down. So let's get started. Jim, what is our team to keep an eye on for this week?
Well, Mallory, the team to watch is the Portland Trailblazers, and I think I'm going to keep this brief today, but a lot of what I'm going to talk about is related to the play-in race for. It's gotten a lot more interesting lately. So the Portland Trailblazers are 30-39. They're in 12th place in the West. They're only 3 games behind Dallas, so they've really played themselves back into contention for maybe extending their season into the postseason. Over the next week, the Trailblazers play 4 home games, and this is why I picked them. I mean, this is a really tough schedule. They have the Grizzlies, the Nuggets, the Celtics, and the Cavaliers. So if they can get through that and still be in the race, I would definitely give them a huge tip of the cap. It's going to be difficult, but at the same time, the way the Mavericks are playing, it seems like everyone is still in the race if you're within a few games because the Mavericks have been losing constantly. Speaking of which, stock down is the Dallas Mavericks. They're now 33-36, 10th place in the West. They're only 1 game ahead of Phoenix, which is the Suns are in 11th. The Mavericks have lost 8 out of their last 10 games, and so even though the Suns haven't really been playing great, and the Trailblazers, I think, have leveled off a little bit lately, mostly because their schedule has been so difficult, the Mavericks have just kept everyone in it. Stock up. The Houston Rockets have now won 7 games in a row. It's been a little bit of a lighter schedule, but all of a sudden, they're back in 2nd place. So they had a stretch for much of the earlier part of the year where they were either 2nd or 3rd place. They dropped down a couple spots, but now they're back into 2nd. So, I mean, if you think about where they were 2 years ago, where they won, I think, around 20 games. Last year, they were exactly 500 at 41-41. Mm-hmm. If they can hold on to that number 2 seed, that is a heck of an accomplishment for that team. And they do have a relatively difficult schedule over the next few days. Teams that have been a little bit rocky as well mixed in there. They're at Orlando, at Miami, home against Denver, and home against Atlanta. So we'll see if they can keep that winning streak going. I mean, Miami's on a long losing streak, so, on paper you would think that they could get that one. Maybe they can get up to double figures in terms of the Rockets' winning streak. But I am just continually impressed by the fact that if you look at all of the competition in the Western Conference, that they right now would be the number 2 seed.
It's pretty crazy when you think about where they are right now. OKC, Houston, Denver, your Lakers at 4. Memphis 5, Golden State 6, Minnesota 7, which is why your spoiler scare was the way it was back on Monday. They have a lot to play for.
Yeah, they ended up, by the way, too, they did end up losing that game to the Pacers, so I guess we're going to go back to 8 on the spoiler scale.
Yeah.
It would have been 9 if they had a 9-game winning streak, but they ended up losing that game to Indiana in a crazy overtime game.
Clippers, Kings, Mavericks round out the 10. And then the Suns are, a full game back. Trailblazers, 3 games back. So I guess it's really the Suns that be competing for a 10 spot. Everybody else? So you think Portland's got a shot?
I think they still have a chance. I mean, from the schedule that I listed, though, it's going to be difficult. I mean, Portland only has 13 games left, and the next 4 are the ones I mentioned, Memphis, Denver, Boston, Cleveland. So, I mean, it'd be tough to there's not that many stretches of any team in the entire season that has a more difficult 4 games in a row than that. So we'll see if they can hang on. But, I mean, like I was saying earlier, too, the Mavericks are having a hard time winning any games. So it's like you could – if you're behind the Mavericks the way the Mavericks are playing right now, you could go on a 5-game losing streak and not even lose any ground. So maybe I'll be curious, in a week to 10 days if Portland's still in it. But if they're going to have to pick up a couple wins, you would think, although you would think that – at 30 and 39 in the West, you wouldn't be in the race anymore, but they are because the Mavericks are 3 games under and in 10th place.
We're just over 10 games for most people, right? And under 15 for a lot of teams. I'd love to tell you who's winning and who's not, Jim, but then I saw last week, and I don't want to get you fined or anybody else fined, the Charlotte Hornets head coach, as to why Melo Ball didn't play. It was in his best interest because he has a wrist or something to not play.
Okay.
To save him and
no comment
for his health.
Yeah, the one thing I will say, I feel like this was about 6 or 7 years ago. I've talked about this before, maybe not on the podcast, but 6 or 7 years ago, I remember there was a Sacramento team that was out of the race and started resting guys with like 5-6 games left in the regular season. To me, that was the first time that I had ever seen teams rest guys who are also about to get 5 months off.
Right.
So, like, from that standpoint of the rest, it doesn't make a ton of sense to sit guys. So, I don't know. Well, this is a conversation for another day.
So you're not on board with preparing to rest by resting?
No. I guess that's how you get into a groove. It's like you get – yeah. I hadn't thought of it that way. That's a creative way to
gotta prepare.
Think about that thing. Yeah.
Yes.
You got to be ready to rest. Yeah, I don't know.
By resting.
We'll see what happens. I don't know. I'd be fine with the league doing something about some of this stuff. So, but that's a discussion for another day, I suppose.
You could do an hour on that because you do bring up
and
a lot
some
of
people have lately.
No, and look, because
on podcasts.
Well, and it's to the point of this, right? I mean, it's these games matter, and they matter sometimes to the teams that you're playing. I mean, if there's if there's a big difference between 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right, in the standings, Jim, and I mean. That could be hosting a first round. That could be hosting or a matchup that's better for you. So, yeah, man, I mean, it's a big difference when you're facing a team that is not putting its best players on the court to compete.
And
I mean, it just is.
It kind of reminds me, I know people hate it when people talk about their fantasy team, and I'm not a huge fan of that either. But one of the analogies that I could use is like people, I haven't played fantasy sports in a long time, but I always remember you're in a league and one of the other owners decides after like week 10 of the NFL season that I'm not going to even fill out my lineup anymore.
Right.
And then the last few weeks of the season, it's like that person is losing to everyone because he's not even trying anymore. And
not
it's
even starting a lineup.
It's the worst. It kills it.
Yeah.
Which is why I think a lot of these fantasy football leagues have started this very fun tradition where whoever finishes in last place has to do something embarrassing.
Awful.
Do we need to start doing that in NBA? Like if you finish in last place, you have to do something embarrassing. You have to like. I don't know what it would be. That's another show, too, where we could come up with ideas of what you have to do.
I know in soccer there's relegation. Right. You do that. Do you pay a fine?
Yeah.
Maybe. I don't know. By finishing last. I mean, I guess if you're trying, I don't know. Because, look, then I can get into discussion with baseball about needing a cap and stuff. I mean, there's literally 2/3 of the league. No shot at winning,
right?
It's just because they're not even spending $50 million, and the 2 teams that are spending the most, like Graf's Dodgers, I think $250 million.
Right?
I mean, it's just
No, you're right.
So
as much as I want to rail on Graf's Dodgers, my Phillies are not that far behind in terms. Well, everyone's pretty far behind the Dodgers, but they spend a lot of money too. So I don't know.
Well, I'll leave you with this. This morning we watched, and the Cubs are down 6-3 in the 8th inning, losing their second straight game to the Dodgers in the Tokyo series. Games that count. And my son goes, "I'm really sad the Cubs aren't very good, are they?" I'm like, "Well, Carver, there are the Dodgers that are defending champs. Ohtani hit a home run. And, you know, it's the Dodgers."
It's a little early to.
But we will start 0-2.
It's a little too early to get concerned, I guess. But there's only 160 games left. But
I'm used to not being involved, being alive by April. But it's March 19th. We're already 0-2.
Right.
So, anyway, Jim Eichenhofer is always appreciated, sir. We'll see you on Friday, and we will be at a watch party. Come on out to Fat Harry's. We will be there for the second game against the T-Wolves. Jim and I will be there. It'll be an official Pelicans watch party. Corona will be there. Pierre the Pelican will be there. Members of the Pels squad. And more importantly, if you didn't get those koozies, I'm not promising. They might be there. We have a lot of really cool swag. It should be a lot of fun. As always, appreciate it.
Thanks, Gus.
Thank you, Mr. Will Guillory. Thank you for listening. You've been listening to the Pelicans Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast. Join us 3 times per week on Pelicans.com, the Pelicans mobile app, the iHeartRadio app, or where you get your podcasts. And be sure to give Jim and Gus a follow on X at Jim_Eichenhofer and GCat_17. We'll see you next time, right here on the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast.